But without further ado, I will turn it over to Ken Bevis, and he can take it away with some wildlife and forests, the basics. Thanks, Ken.
Sean, I'm trying to turn it into slideshow and it's not letting me. Oh yeah, there it'll go. There we go. Okay. Do you want people to be able to see me, Sean?
Well, that's up to you, Ken.
Sure, but my video cannot operate thanks to your permission.
Oh, let's see if we can change that.
Good morning, everybody. Nice to see this list of new and old friends on the participants there. And I've been asked to speak about wildlife habitat in the forest and to kind of break it down into what I referred to as the basics. There we go. Sean won't let me see you, but that you can't see me, I can't see you, but you can hear me. Yes, somebody hit me in the chat if my sound is okay.
You're coming through clear on my end. How's our
Okay,
audience?
audience, and tell me where you're from. Some of you, I know where some of you are from. Sound is good. Thank you, Ryan. Okay, excellent. We'll take
And
that
Ken,
as
you
a
should be able to start your video now.
okay. Can you see my slides?
Yes.
All right, so here we go. So, wildlife in the forest. We're going to look at the basics about food, water, cover, space, the things that wildlife need. Many of you who have seen my coach planning or other presentations, this will not be new, but hopefully some more fodder for your own thinking about how you manage your land and your property. Let's see if I can change slides. There we go. So here's my presentation outline. I always do a commercial for our programs, including Sean's marvelous WSU Forestry Extension, basic needs of wildlife, and some management ideas and different kinds of enhancements that I like to recommend because so many people are really interested in wildlife. It's so cool, and I didn't include this, but when you look at the value statements that people make, wildlife is always up there in the top two or three um, uh, values that people want to take care of on their land. Oh, look, okay, we've got Leavenworth, we've got Clinton, we've got Coopville, we've got Steamboat near north of Olympia, Steve Schubert. Hi, Steve. Marion County, Oregon, Alaska. Ron Jackson is watching from Alaska up there in the North Country. San Juan County, Bremerton, Sigdum's really in the Methow, not in Richland. The forest land. Sacramento, Pierce. Cool. Excellent. Well, thanks for coming, everybody. Wow, this is quite the wide variety. Plain, Mary Gallagher. Hi, Mary. Oh, Carrie Gilgy from Winthrop. Hey, I'm right here near Winthrop myself. So anyway, cool. Union County, Oregon. Well, welcome everybody. So here we go. So let's go about this. Here's the commercial. Small landowners, Sean mentioned, own about 3 million acres in the state of Washington, and there's about 219,000 of us. I own 15 acres here near Winthrop, and we tend to be clustered in certain parts of the state. So the dark green represents small forest ownerships. Quite a few in South Puget Sound down here, a lot Snohomish King, not that many out on the peninsula. That's interesting. Lots in northeastern Washington. And these are our folks. These are the people that we try to help write stewardship plans, give technical advice, help people find grant opportunities. And we're in the process of building out our service forestry program. If you get confused with new labels showing up, well, in classic agency parlance, we're changing our name from forest stewardship to the service forestry program, which is actually a good thing. And local representatives, and we're hiring a bunch of people for Western Washington and Eastern Washington. We're going to retrofit the landowner assistance program into service forestry, which just means representing all of the different services that are available to you, including advice on providing wildlife habitat, and that's me. So the under construction is this new staff, and that's what's happening right now. This is Matt Preventure on the left, who promoted from Western Washington Stewardship Forester, now is my boss, our program manager. So we're really excited, and we're going to continue our deep partnerships with the Cougs, Go Cougs, Washington State University, that Sean so ably represents in Eastern Washington, Northeast Washington. And we work with lots of wonderful landowners. It's so it's so interesting because the people that own land are interested and want to do the right thing, and so I have just this great job of working with people like John and Katrina here. So to the topic at hand, Washington is about 2/3 naturally forested, with the big shrub step basin here, and those forests vary a lot, and I'm not going to go into that into any semblance of detail, but they vary based on vegetation, topography, position on the landscape, et cetera, et cetera. But consistently, they're complex habitats in these complex landscapes. Like this is a stand from the Blue Mountains right next to agricultural fields. This is wheat up here, and here was this really nice stand of older dry forest. And wildlife. This is from Biology 104, but it's an emergent property, meaning wildlife is a response to habitat conditions. We really don't directly manage or provide that many species. So I like to use the example of the western tanager here that returns during the migratory season, or excuse me, for the breeding season after it's migrated all the way back from Central America to nest in a place like this. If you didn't have forest canopy of adequate scale, you would not have western tanagers nesting there. So it's an emergent property. So that's a really important concept because, if you build it, they will come. And complex habitats essentially provide the most opportunities for different kinds of wildlife to exist based upon their needs. And so I like to approach um, I like to approach this topic from the standpoint of habitat complexity rather than needs of individual species, because I think that is the best way to encourage landowners to meet their objective of providing for wildlife, which is done through providing for habitat. Well, here's an issue though, is that humans, we tend to simplify habitats. We tend to simplify landscapes to meet our objectives. So like this stand of planted ponderosa pine that were pruned and mowed and everything to reduce fire risk. Well, that's a very simplified habitat. Heavy equipment, though it's marvelous for its task, is very effective at simplifying habitats. And even in kind of extreme cases, even age forestry, which is laudable for growing wood fast. This is over on the Olympic Peninsula, but that forest right there was just harvested probably for the third or fourth time, which is essentially a monoculture crop. So that's a much simplified habitat. And of course, if we're scared of a tree, we might take it out for reasons of hazard, legitimate or not. So humans tend to simplify habitats. However, we can, as an objective, manage our lands for habitat complexity. And I stick this in here because this is a stand that looked entirely like that one in the back. And Sean, this is near Colville. This was kind of cool because one of our DNR people had a landowner really interested in wildlife. So they left patches, not very big, like, I don't know, a tenth of an acre, a quarter acre of the dense stuff, and thinned out almost all of everything around it, but left a series of these patches. And I love this cavity snag that happened to be in the forest. So they did this on purpose while meeting their objective in the foreground of improving tree health and fire risk and things. So we can do that, and here's a little farther along example of a stand that had been thinned a couple of times, but these logs were left. Here's a dense patch back here. So we can manage for habitat complexity doing it on purpose. So there we go. So to the basics, the topic at hand, and I'll make sure I finish on time. Oh yeah, I'm in good shape. Basic needs, most of us know this from some biology class in the past, or from WSU, from, myself yammering on here yet again. Oh, thank you, Sean. There's the podcast, and Sean and Patrick Schultz just do a fabulous job on what do you call it? Facilitating those podcasts. I recommend them. I've listened to most of them. So anyway, wildlife biology, basic needs, food, water, cover space. Here's a black-tailed buck in a managed stand with cedar trees protected by Vexar tubes. And so the individual needs of any given species are specific, so there's big differences between, well, we're going to get to that, but every organism has some set of things that they're able to eat, and we've all got to take energy in. So there's food, like the waxwing eating a berry. There's water. I mean, we are 70% water ourselves, and pretty much all of our major life forms are of a similar um, composition. And I'm thinking of wildlife. So all wildlife has to have water, either from their food. Quite a few animals get everything they need from their food, vegetation usually, or open water. And so if open water is available, they will use it. And they need a place to hide. They need a place to reproduce, to rest, to, like this Douglas squirrel here, which those who've heard me speak before, I know it's one of my favorite critters for small forest landowners because they have to have certain things. We're going to get to that. But here's cover. This is a hollow log, and I'm pointing at it as if you can see me pointing, or maybe you can. Can you see me? I don't think so. No, my camera's not on. Okay, that's all right. I'm waving my arms around. Food, water, covers. They got to have a place to hide, and they've got to have enough room to do their thing. So home range is the area that an animal moves around in to get food, water, and cover. The home range is the place where all of that is provided. And the scale of that, find this really interesting, because a lot of the wildlife that we discuss, bears, deer, eagles, have big home ranges, and so this is a theoretical home range of a cougar in an upper mountain valley that would be, 2 to 3, 5 to 4 miles wide by 10 miles long, abutting another cougar territory that was of a similar big scale. Or back to my Douglas squirrel, red squirrel, by the way, in eastern Washington, the red squirrels, almost the same critter though. Their home range is somewhere in the order of 2 to 10 acres. And so they could spend their whole life on this one hillside. And you can imagine that little animal knows where every cavity, every good cone bearing tree is on that hillside right there. Or you could be talking about a mouse or a shrew that has a very, very limited home range, that's just, literally a couple of square meters, if they're small enough. So that's an important concept. And here is your place. Here's your, 10 acres, 20 acres, 140 acres, and it's just a piece of the landscape. And I really like the notion that most of our small landowners, myself included, have somewhere between 5 and 40 acres. And that is just a subset of the territories of larger animals. But in that small parcel, you might have two whole home ranges of squirrels, Douglas squirrels or red squirrels, and lots of the little stuff. So that means that the details of those habitat features are most important for the smaller organisms that occur on your little puzzle piece on the landscape. So I just find that a really significant point, because you can do everything you can on your place. You can't necessarily control your neighbors, but you can influence them. But anyway, so there you go. So there's the start. And so all of these things have to be present for wildlife to succeed, which is not only survival but reproduction, to actually continue. Because never forget that most wildlife does not live very long. Like back to my red squirrel, Douglas squirrel, an old one is 6 years old, maybe 7 years old. And so that means they've got to succeed in reproducing. And, a deer mouse, they can reproduce when they're, oh gosh, it's like 8 weeks old. And, their kids get eaten by something. Okay, good. Arwen and Carrie tell me you can see the cursor, which I'm kind of twitching around on. So, for example, a hairy woodpecker could have a successful home range in an alder stand if some of the alder trees had gotten enough diameter that the hairy woodpecker could put a cavity in it. And it's not necessarily, an old growth forest for a hairy woodpecker, but all of it has to be in place for that to happen. So that's an important concept. So I know that some of you have seen this, but, wildlife populations, this is theoretical, but they tend to rise from this theoretical starting point up to some level, and then whenever you can see good population monitoring, it does this classic thing of going up and down around some particular level that will be these biotic and living and non-living, biotic, abiotic limiting factors. And some of those limiting factors that determine population sizes are food, water, or cover, whether or not it's present. That's what I want to speak to after this. And sometimes they're human caused. And an example I like to point out is, and it sounds kind of crazy, but small wetlands in urbanizing settings, the amphibians that will be leaving the pond to go to the uplands will get run over. If the road density is too high, that can actually be something that will be a ultimate limiting factor to cause that line to just crash to zero. So this dance where wildlife is existing on the landscape given the conditions of wherever they are, food, water, cover, or human influence, is what drives this out into the future. So that's significant. So let's just speak a little bit about each of those things. Food, and now, by the way, Sean, you can put this down in my evaluation for thoroughness here, because those WSU guys, they're pretty tough. That was a joke. See, this is sort of like being one of those midnight DJs, because I can't see or hear anybody out there, and I'm just going to ramble on for a little while. So,
Send it out on the airwaves, Ken.
oh, good, somebody's out there. Hi, Sean.
I'm
That's right.
evaluating you. Careful.
Oh, geez. All right. I mean, sorry. Okay, oh, hit me with the electric shock if I say something wrong. Ow! Way to go. Thanks, Sean. Okay, so I'm going to be not thorough on this, but the food, water, cover discussion will be. Thank you, Jenny. Jenny says she's here for me. All right, that's good. We'll be looking towards things that small landowners can. So for herbivores, meaning animals that eat plants, we want different plants. We want different things out there. And fruit-bearing shrubs and legumes, and I don't have a good picture of some clovers or something like that, are particularly rich food sources for many of our wildlife species that are adapted to our forest environment. So the shrub layer is something that is kind of disrespected. I took out my Rodney Dangerfield slide, but we don't really think that much about the shrub layer as being extremely valuable habitats. And so wherever you have something like salmonberry or serviceberry or blue elderberry or red elderberry, those are worth actually maintaining and protecting as a really important wildlife habitat features. So fruiting shrubs are really good. And the native ones, the reason that we emphasize native plants, the main reason is that it has a established role in the ecosystem. That's not to say that non-native plants can't be valuable habitat features, because they certainly are. Oh my gosh, we could go down that pathway deeply. But the native plants, and I'm speaking particularly to managing our small forest lands, ones that bear fruit, and I love the fact that a lot of them have berry in the last part of their name, but those are things to emphasize. So I'm looking at food, water, cover. Also, I always say this: learn what you have on your property and what's nearby. I'm surprised, in fact, I'm startled, and I'm very fortunate, because in this job I've gotten to travel the state and meet people and visit landowners, many of whom are on this call. Nice to see you again. And I'm amazed at the variability in the shrub layer across the landscape, which is it changes even more quickly than the overstory. So that's just something to be aware of. So find out what you got on your place and use it and do it. So food for carnivores. Now, most of our carnivores, and I'm thinking owls and coyotes and marten and weasels, some of their primary foods are small mammals, will be voles. This is a redback vole. Here's a meadow vole. And small mammal habitats, chipmunks, a lot of times they're in grassy areas. This is supposed to represent a meadow, or under down logs. How many times have you seen a chipmunk sitting on top of a down log and then he goes right underneath of it because he's got a little burrow system under here. So food for carnivores provide habitats for small mammals. Yeah, and here's our barred owl. That's a juvenile because its tail tips are there. Something like this. So downwood, dense brush. These are places where the owl, the hawk, could find something to eat. So even though the wood rat, and Sean, I'll tell you the story about this black and white wood rat later because that's a good story. Are important habitats. There you go. Omnivores, now here we are with the bear, meaning kind of the classic wide ranging omnivore. They're going to find what you give them. But same thing, those fruiting shrubs are really valuable. The deer that live off of the shrub layer mostly could be food for a cougar, for example. Although cougars are carnivores, sorry. But omnivores will find what's out there. So there you go. So food. Oh, Dave New, do you recognize that? I think that's one of your photos coming in. Dave, by the way, is giving a presentation in a little while about the use of trail cameras, which are an amazing tool. So, Dave, I think that one's yours, is it? I'm not sure. Okay. So, how about water? Food, water. Aquatic versus terrestrial organisms. I had an interesting discussion about this with my wife, but it's like, is a bullfrog an aquatic organism or a terrestrial organism? And I know they're non-native and everything, but that is a cool photo. Kind of both. When they're tadpoles, they're fully aquatic, meaning like a fish, they breathe water, they live in the water. A western toad breeds in the water. Their tadpoles are fully aquatic, but then the adults are terrestrial. They leave the water after they breed and go live under downwood up in the uplands. So water can be more than just essential for metabolism for drinking, but there are a lot of organisms that they live in it. I mean, they're terrestrial. So here we are with they're aquatic. Your terrestrial organisms. I love the elk standing in the water. That's just kind of cool. Needing a drink. And this is one of the coolest photos. Thank you, Greg Thompson. This is a dipper that is on a stream where chum salmon were spawning, and that's a salmon egg. And so he managed to get this photograph of a dipper eating a salmon egg. And that is a terrestrial organism that is tied to the water of a certain type too, because dippers, as you know, live in flowing streams and have this remarkable habit of going underwater and walking on the bottom and foraging for insects and, well, salmon eggs, obviously, and other things, and then popping back up and sitting there on the rock. So anyway, so water can be really essential. These water sources can be critical, and a lot of times they're not necessarily a water feature like that. And I always like to ask, name that waterfall. If you haven't been there, I totally recommend you go there. That is, pause, Washington State's official waterfall. That's Palouse Falls down there in south central Washington. I recommend it. It's a state park. It's pretty darn cool. Yeah, but these ephemeral puddles can be really important water sources for short periods of the year. So, maintain those. Appreciate them in the springtime, and not long from now. If you have something like this, walk around the edge and look for egg masses. And these egg masses will be either from frogs like the coarse frog here or salamanders. And so amphibians, there are many species that will lay their eggs right along the edge where it warms up early enough, and and then when they hatch out, and when you hear the spring frogs, they're in breeding chorus. They're talking to each other saying, hey, come here, we need to have some kids. So ephemeral water is really important for many creatures. And you can provide water on your property lots of different ways. This one, I love this story because there was a dry site. They had a hose that could reach this. Their house was probably 100 yards away, and this gentleman installed a stock tank with a ramp so the birds and the chipmunks could get out, put his trail camera over it, and he got photos of all kinds of stuff coming to get a drink. This is my puddle. Yes, this is our property after it burned, and I lined it with a liner. And I put my camera over it, and I've been surprised how many things. Oh, when it dries up, I don't fill it up. I just let the snow melt. Right now, that's covered with snow, but it'll have water in it until early June. So that's a crude effort there. Mark Beiser over by Shelton, they actually took a backhoe next to a large wetland and made this ephemeral source here that was separated from the fish in the pond for amphibian breeding, and it worked. That I think that one's really interesting. Another one that's just a little dug pond down in Klickitat, and I wish I could remember these lovely people's names, but they went full on. Uh, Installed this shallow pond. There's a waterfall here. And she had a camera over this and said, we get all sorts of wildlife using this because this was another dry area where water could be the limiting factor. Food water cover. So another type of, or a type of cover is dense vegetation. Places, bird watchers. How many bird watchers are there in the group? I bet there's a few. That where do you go look for birds? Well, shoot, how many of you have either done it or seen the bird watcher standing on the edge of a brush patch like that, going psh, 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 trying to tell the birds that there's trouble afoot and you should show yourself so that we can look at you with binoculars? Or a deer would lay its fawn here. That's actually a nesting vireo right there. So dense vegetation can be a place where, the small creature can avoid the hawk, can get away from the owl. So anyway, dense vegetation is a valuable habitat feature, back to that brush shrub layer. So this place, we were actually having a discussion about how to reforest this. And while Boyd was talking to I forgot to see what was her name, nice lady up by Arlington, there were all these songbirds singing all through this brushy habitat here. So there you go. So cover, downwood. I already mentioned that it provides cover for many species, but a big old rotting log like this is a long-term habitat feature, and that's something I love to remind people of, is that dead wood takes a long time to break down, and it can be home for amphibians. This is Noel Nordstrom, my friend and colleague from up by Port Angeles, with a northwestern salamander, and this is a redback salamander that indeed will use these habitats, and as will the chipmunks and other small mammals. So that's a significant thing. Food water cover, holes in trees for rest, thermal shelter, and reproduction. This is a big leaf maple, and as they get sized to them, they have this marvelous habit of hollowing out. This tree on this property, these landowners said, I want to show you our raccoon tree. And sure enough, families of raccoons had been coming in and out of this tree for as long as these people could remember. Of course, woodpecker cavities here, and lots of creatures use these holes in trees. How does the hole get there? Either through natural process, like rot, broken top rot. Woodpeckers, I'm going to say something about woodpeckers, and I'll try to be brief about that. But here's a red squirrel in a cavity that stayed in there because she had babies, and I was able to reach the cavity. So here we go. Woodpeckers make these cavities every year as a regular part of nesting and courtship behavior. And wherever you have them, keep them, particularly the larger diameter, particularly the broken off ones. These are the ones that there's a cavity right there that can get that hole. Dead tree users. I should ask Dave New. Did I mention dead wood as a valuable habitat feature? That's a total inside joke because I'm obsessed with dead wood. Pileated woodpeckers, most of you have seen them. This is a male about the size of a crow, largest woodpecker in North America. Incredibly powerful excavator. They make these rectangular oval holes deep into uh, dead sections of trees. They can even go through live trees into the dead wood to go after wood boring insects and carpenter ants in particular. Other primary cavity excavators that make every year a nesting hole: hairy woodpeckers, red nape sapsucker in eastern Washington, red headed sapsucker in western Washington, and every year they will make one of these amazing holes, and they'll be like, oh gosh, say this hairy woodpecker hole will be 4 times deeper than the diameter. And so this is a cross section of a pileated, but this thing is like, you can't really see it here, but it's almost like 2 feet deep. Well, what they've done, food, water, cover, they've taken this chisel and pliers thing on their head and made cover out of solid wood. It's an amazing thing. So they're keystone species because they modify the habitat. Oh, here's the hairy woodpecker again. Every man's woodpecker, white on the back, black and white, pretty much in every forest type. Yeah, here's a couple more. The downy woodpecker, the little version of the hairy, nuthatch, flicker. There's some of those guys. These cavities are abandoned every year. They either make a new cavity or they fix one. So oftentimes there's cavities that were created in previous years that other species move into, these secondary cavity users. And the little owls will use them, the saw-whet, the pygmy, the screech will use these woodpecker cavities for nesting and roosting, for cover. Mammals will use them. There's my Douglas squirrel in the bottom. Flying squirrels, there's a funky creature right there. Bats really like to use abandoned woodpecker cavities, and the various weasels when they can fit in them. So the home range, indeed, as I said, is the place where food, water, and cover are all available. And I just wanted to point out the difference with that and a territory. And a territory is a defended portion of the home range, usually in association with breeding, but not always. Like cougars will defend a territory year round, which leads to breeding. But the kind of the classic would be this bull elk in a pasture over there next to the lower Skagit, down there where those elk stand around in the farm fields. This guy's territory is about 20 yards across, and I watched him for a while. And this big bull intimidated all these smaller bulls by just looking at him. He would just turn his head towards them, and they would turn away. So his territory was relatively small and moved around. So anyway, so home range versus territory are not directly interchangeable terms. So as you manage your forest, you want to provide niches for multiple species. And so, for example, this stand of trees on Lopez Island, up in the canopy, you might get golden crowned kinglets or other little songbirds that glean in the foliage. The deer, the black-tailed deer, are eating the shrub layer. So the shrub layer is supporting the deer, not necessarily the canopy. You might have a brown creeper that goes up and down the stem of a large tree, or a shrew, or a mouse, or a vole, or a salamander living down here under the soil and under the rotting logs. Or you could have, the pileated woodpecker on the standing dead stem, which is really a different version of that same habitat. But within this forest right here in front of us, there are different specific niches for different species groups that sometimes overlap, but sometimes not. So it's kind of interesting. So as you manage, keep that in mind. And once again, we can manage for habitat complexity. We just need to do that. So we can address the limiting factors with habitat complexity consciously. And enhancements is something that we can do that will hasten along are doing something for wildlife. So I always like to point this out on the tree farm thing. Wildlife is right up here on top. This is back to that commentary about wildlife being a very important objective to most of us. And our reasons are aesthetic, in many cases, and we just want to provide for them because we like them. So here's Len Miner. By the way, our field day this summer is going to be at this landowner's property over by Chihuahua, right, Sean? Is it by Chihuahua? And Lynn has put up a whole bunch of
Correct.
nests.
Yeah.
That's right. Okay, so you might get to meet Lynn Miner this summer. So while you're in your management, now I'm going to be a little specific about things to do. Broken top trees. I just find this so interesting, having studied and followed woodpeckers around for a long time. Often that cavity, and now we know that that's a deep, like this one right here, really the whole cavity goes down pretty darn far. Here's one right at the top, and this one has probably cracked open. But as this thing stands, and once a tree is broken off, it stands longer, meaning it doesn't uproot. And so this broken off stem here will soften from the top, and often you will see these cavities appearing in those. So we can mimic that. So this excuse me, habitat feature can stand for a long time and provide for all those creatures I was just talking about. One way to do it is you can have your arborist friend. If you don't have some of these structures and you have a situation where you might have a hazard tree, suggestion would be to get your local friendly arborist to excuse me, ooh, that was rude, to snag the tree as a verb by way of taking the crown out of the tree, essentially artificially breaking it off so that you wind up with a stub that has no weight. This was a created snag, and look at all those cavities in there. So here's what you want to do. You want to provide the woody cylinder to allow decay. It doesn't have to be that high, at least, I don't know, 8 or 10 feet. I say 50 feet because that's roughly half the height of a lot of our trees, not so much in Western Washington, but so somewhere between 25 and 50 feet. You get rid of the weight of the crown, and so now you have that cylinder. 12 inches in diameter is kind of the not the absolute cutoff, but that's aiming at hairy woodpeckers. So 10, 12 inches minimum at the top. Take the saw, get the guy to rough it up so it looks like it broke off, and there's more surface area for fungal spores to get in there. And if you're really worried about safety, because we have a lot of situations where we visit people with small ownerships, and the question will be, is that tree going to fall on my house? Is that a dangerous tree? Which frankly, we really can't answer definitively. I always refer people to arborists, and I always suggest snagging the tree when they can. And sometimes people do this, and it's so cool. So these nice landowners over in Snohomish were very proud of this cedar tree that had died in their backyard, and their arborist suggested this. And it's short enough that if it fell over, well, it might get the propane tanks, but probably not. It wouldn't hit anything, so it's a safety thing. The village of Suncadia over by Roslyn in the year 2000, and I won't elaborate on this, they made a whole bunch of them, 22 years ago, and they're in people's front yards. They put little signs on them. There's woodpecker holes all through them. The Kitsap Forest Theater over by Silverdale, and I was just stunned by this. This was so cool. But they had snagged several big Douglas firs right in the parking lot. And it's like, so they were taking a chance, a minimal chance, I might add. Because I would argue that this stem right here is not an enormous hazard. But, so anyway, so consider using that technique. If you are going to do some logging, and most logging these days is done with the hot saw. Here we go. Watch this. 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004, 1005, 1006, 1007, 1008, 1009, 1010, 1011, 1012, 1013, 1014. In 14 seconds, this logger made, and by the way, this is a big machine, about a 10-foot high stub, and they harvested the log. And so if you're doing logging and you don't have snag habitats, which by the way, a lot of our stands don't have because we've either cut firewood or it's been managed, intensively before, which most of our stuff has. Tell them to make some, and put them over there on the edge. So anyway, that's a very good technique. You can create some snags by girdling, which is viable, but you got to make sure the cut down to the cambium is wide enough. I've seen a few times where people tried this with just a single chainsaw cut. It didn't kill the tree. So you want to do it like that. And this tree right now on Ken Miller's place over by Olympia is a snag. And he left it out in this clear cut. And his thought was as a perch for the owls and the hawks to get the voles that might eat his trees. This one was girdled up at the top in the Green River watershed, which is actually kind of a brilliant stroke. So there you go. And there's Lisa doing that. You can even install them. I'm going to look over my left shoulder. You can't see me, but I'm looking at this one right here is in the edge of my yard right outside my office, and everything perches on it. It's just crazy wonderful. So I dug a hole. I treated the base so it wouldn't rot out quite so quick. Phil Hess over in Cleellum, my friend and forestry consultant, he got the snag bug some years back, and he dug holes with a backhoe, put gravel around it, tamped in these butt logs from harvest because there used to be a mill there, and 20 years later, they're full of cavities. I just think that's so cool. He had white-headed woodpeckers nesting in his installed snag in his yard. Osprey platforms are actually installed snags when you see those along the river. This is on Lopez Island, a little mitigation thing where they did that. Okay, so nest boxes. Some people, are skeptical about nest boxes, but I really like them because they work. They're cavity surrogates. So sometimes these can provide what's missing for chickadees or small owls. Not so much woodpeckers. They got to make a hole. You can fill them up with chips. There's a lot to it. But you want to build them. And this is illustrating to build them kind of the same so that you can fix them. So they're going to break. And you're going to see. Well, they imitate abandoned woodpecker cavities. This is a pole camera of baby woodpeckers from my friend Jeff Kozma from a few years back, but just showing that indeed lots of uses on cavities. So some of the users, I already showed you the red squirrel, Douglas squirrel using this hollow log that was hollowed out. Wood ducks, oh my gosh, there's kind of a success story about nest boxes all around North America. There's been long-standing wood duck nest box programs, which are these great big ones, and it works. Tree swallows, right? So for forest landowners, I like to recommend just really two versions, and there's the bluebird scale box that's more or less imitating a hairy woodpecker cavity, and a larger version which is more or less imitating a hollow tree or a pileated cavity. You want to rough up the inside, you want to mount them using aluminum nails or something like that so that when the box ultimately falls off of the tree, you don't have some chunk of steel in the tree. Creatures that can use them, there's a whole bunch: kestrels, flying squirrels, I mentioned screech owls. But here's the rub on boxes: you got to maintain them. You can't. It's not a one and done. If you do it one and done, they'll be good for 3 years. And how many of us have seen a box like this on a fence post somewhere? They fail at the roof, which I find really interesting. They don't have to be made out of cedar because the wood's gonna fail before it rots. But some species like to fill them up with grass and feathers and things. These are swallow nests. So you do need to check them at least every other year to pull out old stuff, bigger boxes, maybe put some chips. But if you do the maintenance, they can last a long time. It's pretty darn amazing how resilient these things are. And so, yeah, so there you go. So I like nest boxes because they work and you get to see the results, and put them out in the open and you'll get violet green and tree swallows. So there you go. Okay. A lot of people ask about bat boxes. Well, bat box is providing a roosting place, i.e. cover, for a nocturnal or excuse me, what's the word for flying? A nocturnal flying mammal eating insects. And they're looking for a little narrow crack that they can spend the day, safely hiding. So here's some examples of bat boxes. And they'll go in there singly or in groups. These two, by the way, were very successful. This one is at Turnbull Refuge of a rocket box style. This one is right on the Columbia River up near Newport. And both of these had tons of use. And this little platform right here was actually to collect bat poop so you could monitor use. One problem with bat boxes is it's hard to see them inside, when you look. But anyway, they need to be built, to a certain spec so that the cracks are the right width, and there's some good links, lots of good information for how to do that. Piles. So excuse me, a lost opportunity for wildlife habitat is the way that we handle extra woody material from our thinning and management, because we often view this as waste, a brush pile, a slash pile. But I like to call it a habitat pile because the amount of use that these collections of woody material get is pretty astounding. So if you wanted to build a habitat pile, which by the way is just a moniker meaning you intend to leave it, you're not going to chip it up, burn it, dispose of them, etc. If you want to do that, then you want to put the big stuff on the bottom. And the reason you put the big stuff on the bottom is because it'll provide some interstitial space here that will stay there as the upper pieces decay. Now, big difference between dry places and wet places in regard to how long these last, but I'm convinced that their function is the same because food, water, cover, lots and lots of little things will use these accumulations of woody material that you can essentially establish deliberately in a place where they're not going to be considered a fire hazard or an eyesore or something like that. And it's pretty remarkable. This one is actually on Suncadia, where they included having piles as part of their management. And there's some wrinkles to it we're going to get to. In Eastern Washington, because of the possibility of introducing a flush of Ips bark beetles, you don't want to use green pine slash and just pine between March and September-ish. And Melissa might speak to that. But this is the only downside that I've come up with to building these piles is this particular caveat about Eastern Washington bark beetles. So there you go. Here you go. This was group of school kids on a recent thinning over on the west side. It's a great activity to do with friends and family. So they looked at the diagram, I told them about it, and here they go. There's the teacher. Okay, put the big stuff on the bottom. Here we go. Go, go, go. And boom, we built this beautiful pile right here, which I thought was so cool. It was so fun. Who might use it? A wren, a deer mouse, different reptiles, ground squirrels, chipmunks, little birds, Douglas squirrel, etc. So lots of things will use these piles. It's kind of amazing how much use they get. Here's that down log surrogate from the Takai Tree Farm, Jane. There you go. Let's see. And here's some more. These are the idea of a downlog surrogate is to concentrate these pieces of the larger wood so they basically decay in place into a concentration of that stuff. In fire habitats, this indeed might burn up, but it would burn right in that one spot. But that's a downlog surrogate, which is kind of like a habitat pile, but it's the basis for it. But that's one thing to do if you're using the you have smaller diameter wood and you've chipped up or burned the finer material out of usually concern for fire. So there you go. Den sites, I've found, and I bet a lot of us have, every now and then you'll find some place where obviously a creature like a porcupine, a raccoon, a coyote, a bobcat will be going under something to have a den site. And I've had this flash more than once. Why couldn't we actually arrange woody material to create den sites? A bioden, I've heard them called before. So you certainly could. So same idea, only rather than just putting the big stuff crisscross, you'd make a tunnel down into the pile. So here's one. Create a den structure by arranging the lowest pieces to make a tunnel that could be used by, I already mentioned it, the raccoons and those guys. If you're planting shrubs to do an enhancement, do something to help them survive early on. I like to call it feral landscaping because that means you're going to do whatever it takes to get them established. And this place over here by Oakville, Julie Sackett, my old colleague, was really excited about her stream buffer on this intermittent stream, and it worked. I went back there last year, and this stuff was like 8 feet high. I know it was in Western Washington. It's crazy, crazy lush. But these had been planted just a few months before this picture. So there you go. Wherever you get your plants, the conservation districts are always really good local resources to tap into. So wherever you are, find out who your plant specialist is at your conservation district. And, you might bump into Melvin here along the road by Cleellum, who buys plants from the conservation district, grows them out in plastic bags, which is just a brilliant marketing strategy, and he sells them by the road to people driving past in Eastern Washington. So, almost done. Your best strategy for the maximum species diversity is to provide for habitat complexity using the elements you know about, and then strategic enhancements when you can do it. and you can produce these diverse habitats that will provide for a lot of different things. So if you build it, here's a few of those ideas: snags, boxes, piles, log surrogates, shrubs, water. And really, whenever I think about how to manage and enhance habitat, you really get down to some of these same key things that are in the toolbox of small forest landowners. These are things we can do. We can't necessarily shape, I don't know, the seasons on whatever, but these are the things we can do on our property. So someone was asking in the chat about um, good sources for the question and answer. Uh, the question about bat boxes and that sort of thing. This one particular um, uh, website, the WDFW Living with Wildlife, is a really good compendium of articles about all kinds of stuff. Here's another one: Woodland Fish and Wildlife. We've got a whole series of articles there. The WSU Forestry Extension website is an infinitely rich source for all kinds of stuff. Dig in there and find their library of resources about, and it's by subject. It's pretty darn remarkable. And Oregon has their own version of the same thing. So, Bat Conservation International is a great source for bat stuff. I can go back to that other page there, Sean. I don't know if we could post those links. So, how can we help wildlife? Remember, it's one of our top objectives. We can provide habitat, and wildlife appreciates that. So when we can, give them some place to be, remember, they're emergent properties on the landscape. I always like to give a shout out to the photographers that let me use some of their photos, particularly my wife Terry and Greg Thompson. And so, yeah, I try not to take too many from the net, but I do sometimes. So here's my email address. Please send me questions, comments, good stories. I love good stories, like, the porcupine ate my front door, something like that. I have this marvelous privilege of working with all of these wonderful landowners, and I just love hearing from people. So, how did I do, Sean?
Not bad. 9:54. So we don't have a ton of time for questions, but go ahead, and if you have any questions, we'll kind of have a conversation for about 6 minutes until we switch to the next speaker. But this is the time, if you are going to be switching rooms, to go ahead and move over into the next room. So before we jump into questions, I just want to say thank you very much, Ken, for taking the time to come out today and talk to us about wildlife basics. I always love hearing from you.
Nice. Do you want me to
Um,
Go ahead, you do it. Go.
Nope, nope. I would just say, do you want to run through some of the chats and see if there's any comments or questions you want to do? And then feel free if anybody has anything to
Yeah.
throw in comments or questions, and
Well,
we'll run those for a little bit.
Carrie asked a good question about snowberry, because I know in our area there's tons of it, and it gets the little snowberry, and it's like the least palatable of the berries, but it does eventually get eaten. It's just kind of interesting that it does get eaten, but it's last. So yeah, it is an okay shrub, and I think part of its adaptation is that it's not quite as yummy as the other stuff. But yes, Carrie, it does have use. Should I keep going, Sean? Going down
Yeah,
through there?
yep.
Black-tailed deer stand on their back legs to get to the wild cherry tree foliage. Stephanie's responding to my comment that I made before, that deer can't stand on their hind legs, and I've qualified that thanks to observations. They can't stand on their hind legs for very long. But yeah, there they go. Because usually deer will produce a browse line. Thank you, though. Any recommendations for keeping boxes cooler during heat waves? You know, Jenny, that's a great question. I have heard of people making sure that they might be, whereas previously you would put the box facing, say, west or south, so the idea would be it would heat up faster for juveniles. You might actually switch that around, put it on the north side. I heard of people last year during that crazy heat wave actually putting this one friend here in Winthrop. She had several nest boxes with tree swallows. She put ice packs on the nest boxes, and it worked. In my later talk about climate change, I'm going to say something about that. Good, Linda. Yeah, Linda, check out Bats Northwest and Bat Conservation International. Those are two really good websites that have specs on how to build a bat box, suggestions of where to put them, and everything. Yep. Ocean spray, Jane Takai, it has some browse value, and there are some little birds that'll eat the seeds. Its most value is just in terms of cover and complexity. And ocean spray and snowberry both share that they're mildly palatable there, but they're not the preferred ones. So they almost, the deer eat other things in preference. But ocean spray does have value, yes. Okay, good. Okay, Jenny's, her boxes have been in place for 20 years. They're trying to figure that out. Yeah. Yeah, I'd say shade. And if it really gets intense, gosh, that's direct. There you go. So Steve has watched deer eating ocean spray, eating the flowers. Yeah, there you go. So yes, it has value. Nice. What fun. Guys, so Sean, that was got 86 people. Holy smokes, everybody. Okay, grab my email there. I'm going to write it on here again. Send me questions, comments, and I'm going to be on later today with a new show about climate change, which was going to be interesting. So, congratulations to Sean and the WSU team for last year's national award for this event. And Sean, I think 2 for 2. That's what to go for today.
Actually, that award was for the summer field day, so we might now run for the winter school.
Oh, it was. Oh, well then. Well, okay. Well, congratulations is in order anyway.
Thank you.
Nice. Yay. Okay. Well, look at that. I even finished on time. You guys, hey, put that on my evaluation, would you?
It's marked.
Okay. Well, thanks a lot, everybody. Look forward to hearing from you on the in the Funny Farm Google box here. And thank you, Sean. Thanks for hosting us today.
Thank you very much, Ken.